We hear a lot about the elites, the top of society's pyramid. In this video, we're going to explore the current behavior of Earth's elite class. We will compare this to 50 years ago. It is our belief that society's overall health can be measured by the level of virtue the elites actually demonstrate. This virtue must be more than perception to help the societies they rule. Stick around as we measure the elites of today. Welcome to Our World Leaders Behaving Well, a unique opportunity to observe the stellar performance of our world leaders. Their behavior, as always, has always been an inspiration to all the people. That's part of why they're the elite. They inspire us to greater things and look after us. And we should be thankful to have such well-behaved leaders. But we can't just say that. We have to show you some examples of their wonderful behavior. And then there's the intellectual in you that goes, well, if Nancy Pelosi is going to Taiwan, maybe World War III is beginning. And all these people start mumbling and rumbling. And so, I didn't want to say the word musket, so I'm not sure if I'm allowed. But what Nancy Pelosi did was provocative in some people's eyes, as the Chinese have a very they feel like Taiwan is their country. In a sense, she should have maybe checked with the Chinese authorities before visiting China. I don't know. But it wasn't treated as a China visit. Oh, it gets into a little bit of a, perhaps, shall we say, a dispute. Or perhaps it was done to rile China. Well, why wouldn't it rile China for that to happen? Let's put the shoe on the other foot. And imagine if, what's his name, Xi Jinping, the Chinese, I don't know, it wouldn't be the leader, but if someone second in command at the CCP were to visit, something that's not America but really close. We don't have anything. We don't have any disputed territories. But for the Chinese, it would probably stick to something like, some island that we kind of have, and so there's got to be something. We fought a war over there. Anyway, so there's no way it would happen. There's no way to parallel that. But China and Taiwan, and it's just right across the bay. It would seem to be like Cuba, but we don't claim Cuba. So maybe China is no more Taiwan than Cuba is American. But I'm not a genius or a historian, especially concerning the Oriental section. They have their rivalries, I'm sure. But I understand that Japan has interest in Taiwan. So certainly if it's mostly Japanese, then American going there is not a big deal. We have to look at things like that because World War III, it could happen at any moment. We're living in Sherlock Holmes times where not only Europe is a powder keg, but the whole thing is a powder keg. And so we have to watch how we say things, but you have to pay attention to what people do. So Nancy Pelosi going to Taiwan was to cover for her husband, to rile the Chinese, or just check on her investments there. I think they do some things about computer chips or something there. I think they're like third in the world, but I'm not sure of that. And that's the only industry America still isn't dominated in. So Taiwan is Chinese and they own the chip business. I don't know. I don't see how that could be a problem, to be honest with you. Well, into today's stories, a D-list actress runs into an apartment building, witnesses, and then leaves the scene of this accident in the apartment building and continues to drive and runs into a home, destroying the home and all that. No one was injured in this incident. The actress was severely injured. Meanwhile, in Taiwan, is that in China? No one's really sure. But in Taiwan, Nancy Pelosi, why? Nancy Pelosi, Speaker of the House, goes to Taiwan. Maybe she just wanted to get a good deal on some flower pots. It's a good place to shop. They have a lot of things. I bought a lot of things from Taiwan, but I've never went there to actually see the goods. Maybe Nancy's just a good shopper. Maybe she and her husband like to get antiques. Oh, her husband wasn't there. Oh, well, so Nancy went on a business trip, representing the United States of America? Apparently so. So, what's the deal with that? Was it just to cover up for the fact that her husband wasn't there because he didn't like Taiwan baskets? No, he happens to be in jail or something because he had a DUI. Doesn't mean he's in jail, probably isn't in jail, but he has a DUI and someone was injured, as I understand, and that might be why she's in Taiwan. Maybe she just wants to not be in the country. I don't know. But this is just our world leaders behaving well. Perhaps we should check in with London now and see what's happening in that part of the world. London? What's going on? Well, London is always a place of business, and Nancy Pelosi's trip to Taiwan hasn't affected business all that much, but business is not doing well anywhere. Really? It's not a good time for business. But then again, there's always someone making good business out of any situation. And of course, the microchip market, being one of Taiwan's specialties, has done some tingling. Nancy Pelosi probably has some investments in that, and yes, that probably had some effect. I haven't checked today. Well, that might have been more important for you to have gone to the Commons and did some trading. Well, of course, it might have been an opportune time to do so, but as I am a paid observer, I must withstand and I can't take advantage of information I might get in this business. Well, that's very noble of you. I'm sure our Speaker of the House, being a leader, is even more noble. Well, perhaps, because nobility is one of their claims to being in power. They're the elites. Shouldn't we expect a little more? Well, yes, before you go too far, you young chaps won't remember, but there was a time in America. Now, it was observed differently abroad than in America, I'm sure, but one of your senators had an incident with a secretary, and she was drowned in the process of a tragic car accident in which he was intoxicated out of his freaking mind. And so the occurrings of today are no different than in the past. The elites are behaving pretty much as they always have, and most likely as they always intend to. Very well, as it were. Well, you see, they call themselves elites, and we feel like they should get their due. No one talks enough about them. They're always in the shadows, too busy doing the elite work to get the spotlight. So it's time, we feel like the elites should have their day. Honor what they do, because after all, they're the elites. They keep us in a higher level. Elite means enlightened. So they should show the way for us all. Well, shall we continue? Oh yes, I'm sure it won't take much. These elites are busy being elite around this world. There's just examples after examples that we can give you. So if you want to measure the, shall we say, the state of the union or state of any kind of government or empire, you will study the behavior of the elite, the upper crust, the rulers, the ones who make and decide how societies operate, the rulers, not necessarily just the politicians or the leaders. You've got people that affect culture. You've got church leaders. You've got Hollywood. You've got all sorts of things that factor into being elite. And you've got people who have lots and lots of money. So, generally, the elite have money, influence, and therefore power. And so how do this collective behave? Historically, they behave differently than today. Ironically, the perception of the elite is always of utmost importance, how they're perceived by the masses, media potential that's unprecedented, and yet how important watching the upper class is to the rest of the society. And our theory is that as it degrades, we all should be careful. And so if that's the case, how has the elites of today differed from the ones in, say, 50 years ago? We will answer that in just a moment. And so we can have a little fun with it and say, is it important how the elites behave? Is it important that the elites we are dealing with here now are worse or better than the ones before? Let us find out. Next, we shall talk about how the elites behaved earlier, and we'll compare to how they behave now to find out if there's anything to worry about at all. Perhaps they're behaving just as they always have. Now, before we go to great length to detail the doings of one generation's elites versus another generation's and do an historical perspective, let's first go back just a generation or maybe a bit more and see what direction things are headed. We mentioned earlier about a senator, 1970s, maybe 60s. Yes, late 1960s, a senator was involved in a very bad public incident. Without going into great detail, an incident that should have derailed most any politician's career, but it didn't. He went on to die in the Senate, had a long history, despite the fact that his brother was assassinated as president. The family was the Kennedys, and they were powerful, and Senator Edward Kennedy was involved in something called Chappaquiddick. It was the location where the accident occurred, and he was very drunk, and he was with a secretary who was very dead. Amazingly, the investigation was rather shallow and was hushed in details, but everyone knew it happened. And he still got elected and was quietly allowed to finish his career with some sort of grace. How was that possible? Today, we must compare, shall we say, what is typical behavior of the elite class, or members of it, and there's a general tone, even though specifics can highlight that. Something like the Kennedy situation in Chappaquiddick was a good marker to study 50 years ago. And so, we shall study just a little bit more about what happened at Chappaquiddick. Chappaquiddick was the death knell to Camelot. What is Camelot? Camelot was a feeling, a tone of utopia was just around the corner, and John F. Kennedy represented this Camelot, this America, this good guy America. I think you must note that Kennedy was the first television president. He was young, he was good looking, his wife was very beautiful, and he was elected because of his television appeal was considered a factor for a very close election. And then he was assassinated 2 years into his office. And his brother was also assassinated, who was appointed Attorney General in Kennedy's term. So all three of these brothers, John Kennedy, Robert Kennedy, and Edward Kennedy, had tragic political careers, to say the least. And that would mean more to you if you understood how important the Kennedy family was. They were the top of the pyramid of the elite. The Kennedys were very important. Now, obviously, this elite class is very hard to identify once you get past the leaders, but the Kennedys set the pace for the cultural level and expectation of everyone. Everyone wanted to be the Kennedys, and the Kennedys were held in high esteem. But Chappaquiddick turned the tables from a family who were mourned as victims for almost half a decade, certainly a long time in our world of high-paced media. But this was not the same. This Kennedy was not dead, but a young lady was, and it did not look good. And the moral tone of the country was very conservative at that time. And religion still had an impact on affairs. And so, normally, that would have ended the Kennedy career, especially one of Ted Kennedy at least, and there were no more Kennedys in office, and it did effectively end the Kennedy domain over high society. And that's kind of what we have to study, is basically we're just trying to see how the upper crust, the ones who don't have really anything to force them to behave, how do they behave? And when they behave a certain way, it's usually, or can be, an indication of a society's health. And that is what we're trying to determine, is how much have we degraded since the 1960s. The Kennedy and Chappaquiddick incidences were perceived in a certain way, and it actually served to make the elite behave. And then you had things like Watergate and Richard Nixon just after that, and suddenly, all of a sudden, American politics were not squeaky clean, and America was no longer the cowboy in a white hat. And as the top of the echelon has a big hit, sometimes it has a ripple effect. So perhaps that should be studied as well. So we're talking about the elite, the top of society, the movers and shakers, and how they affect the rest of society and why it matters. And we got to Chappaquiddick as the first instance in modern history where the elite, a representation of the elite, was given a very definitive pass. And that was the beginning of a degradation of the elite's performance, the lessening of any virtue they may have demonstrated. And so if Chappaquiddick was the 1960s version of giving the elites a pass, what would be something today that would indicate something to compare and to determine, are we going downhill? Are the elites degrading and having less and less virtue? Even though they may present themselves, as they often do, as virtuous, it seems today that virtue signaling is becoming art. So certainly on the surface, our elites have never been more virtuous. But it's our job to dig a little deeper and see what's really going on. And when societies do crumble, often it can be pointed to a weakness, an extreme weakness at the very top. One of our hopes in making this video was to awaken all of us, those of us who know we're not the elite, but the regular people, to alert us to start watching the behavior of these elites, because we can't control what they do. That's why they're elite. They can do whatever they want. And there has been a historic obligation to do the right thing. However, as elites become more emboldened, often they become less and less virtuous. Now, does that mean that empires and societies can't continue on? That is the big question. It does appear there is a trend that is not encouraging to us regular people. However, a great leader could always surface. Any society, no matter what condition it's in, could find itself with good leadership, and things could change on a dime. That's why it's so important to pay attention and never throw your hands up in despair, but just pay attention. We hope you've enjoyed this video and learned something, and the hope of it is that you start paying attention and dig just a little beneath that veneer that's always easy to portray. Because, quite frankly, our society just might depend on it. And understand that societies, at least complex and sophisticated ones, aren't built overnight. The ones we enjoy today took thousands of years, and it does seem to be in peril. It's never, ever too late to start doing better.